Hello, my name is Jacob Binkowski, and I'm here to discuss Pan Am Flight 1736, the crash and the investigation that ensued after. The factors leading up to the crash of Pan Am 1736 included some of the things listed here. Initially, there was a bomb threat at the Gran Canaria Airport, which was the original destination of Flight Pan Am 1736, as well as KLM 4805, both large wide-body jets that were supposed to land at the large airport known as Gran Canaria Airport, but were redirected to Tenerife, which was a much smaller airport. Tenerife also had adverse weather that came in frequently due to how it is positioned, the altitude it's at, and the fact that it's surrounded by water. It was prone to fog conditions. Tenerife ATC was also not equipped to handle the type of traffic being diverted there, as they didn't have experience with large commercial jets. They mostly dealt with local flights. The pilots were operating on tight schedules, and everybody was trying to get the passengers to their destination as quickly as possible. Airports are located several hundreds of kilometers away. As you can see here, this was the original destination, Gran Canaria Airport. This will be shown on the slides as well. And this is Tenerife Airport. Once the two jets arrived at Tenerife, flight KLM 4805 was told to back taxi on the main runway 30. They began to back taxi, and flight Pan Am 1736 was also told to back taxi, but the instructions given were to turn left on the third taxiway and proceed on the taxiway to back taxi. The reason for this was because the airport was so crowded with so many jets being diverted there from the bomb threat that they had to resort to these measures to get the planes to line up for takeoff. This is where the incident started to break down, because KLM 4805 proceeded to turn 180 to line up for the runway. Pan Am 1736 was still back taxiing, and they started to get confused as to where the third or the fourth taxiway was. So they were kind of discussing that in the cockpit, and as they continued to discuss that and talk to ATC, KLM 4805 began to take off. There was a sudden fog condition that occurred, and that reduced visibility, so KLM 4805 was not able to see Pan Am 1736 until they were only 100 meters away, which was too late. KLM 4805 used some ambiguous language and also did not hear some transmissions, so therefore they thought they were cleared for takeoff, but they actually were never cleared for takeoff by ATC. Here is a diagram of the Tenerife Airport, and as you can see, the airplane apron was over here where the majority of planes were landing. Were parking, and this is where air traffic control told KLM to move and back taxi along the runway, and also instructed Pan Am to back taxi along the runway but turn off at taxiway 3 and continue to back taxi on the taxiway to line up behind KLM. However, since the turn on taxiway 3 was somewhere near 150 degrees, the Pan Am flight was a little confused as they saw taxiway 4, which was only like a 30-degree turn, and there was some confusion in the cockpit as to which one they should be taking, because this one seemed impractical since it was returning back to the apron. ATC, however, said it was the first runway that would clear them of the apron, and that's why they would prefer them to take that turn. However, since they were not used to working with large jets, they didn't realize how difficult it would be to make this 148-degree turn, since smaller aircraft were able to do it on a daily basis over there, but a Boeing 777 was a lot more difficult to maneuver in such tight conditions. and that caused confusion for Pan Am 1736. And as the fog came in, KLM 4805 was not able to see the Pan Am flight leaving or staying on the runway. They weren't able to determine where it was, and they continued to take off until they saw the lights, and it was too late at that point. The joint investigation was actually not done by NTSB, even though a U.S. plane was involved, since the jurisdiction was under Spanish jurisdiction. And Spain determined that KLM 4805 began their takeoff without actually confirming clearance. They were never cleared for the takeoff. They just thought that ATC had said okay, which they thought meant they were clear for takeoff, but the explicit instructions were never given to them. The pilot was in a rush because he was trying to be in compliance with Dutch duty time regulations, and he was the chief pilot. There was a sudden fog condition that occurred that made their visibility very, very limited. And there was an issue where, as they were trying to get their clearance, Pan Am had made a radio transmission, and it caused the radio frequencies to basically squeal, and they were unable to hear anything ATC was saying except for the words okay. And when they heard the words okay, they assumed it meant cleared for takeoff because they had just requested clearance for takeoff. A second investigation done, joint investigation was done by Holland, and Holland determined that actually the fault, even though it was still with KLM Airlines, there were other contributing factors, like the fact that the airport was overcrowded and not equipped to handle this type of traffic. The Spanish air traffic control tower may have been watching a football game. There was evidence of that on the voice recordings. The Spanish from, the transmission from the Spanish air traffic tower was a little bit ambiguous in its delivery, and they were unable to understand exactly what they were saying. And the fact that Pan Am 1736 failed to exit at the appropriate taxiway. And ultimately, they did admit that it was the fault of the KLM flight, but they had a couple of their counter arguments. And from an NTSB viewpoint, if we had done the investigation, the US, our NTSB department, we would be very impartial and use a 4-step process. We would have a go team, party system, a black box analysis and determination of cause. The go team would explore operations and human factors, look at ATC, look at the systems and structures. For example, they realized that ATC there did not have ground radar, so even though there was fog, they were unable to determine that there were planes still on the runway. If they had ground radar, that could have been something they would have noticed and alerted the 2 planes still on the runway. The party system would involve Boeing, Pan Am, KLM, as well as the FAA if it was in the US, or ICAO since it was in Spain, and everybody would be involved in trying to determine contributing factors. Black box recovery and review, it would involve recovering the black box and just investigating the radio communication prior to the incident and analyzing what contributed to the incident. And ultimately, the NTSB would determine the cause and issues that were involved with this incident, as well as compiling the information and recommending new safety procedures based on the lessons learned from this incident. And these are some of the references I used, which will be available on the PowerPoint slide. Thank you very much for attending this presentation. Have a wonderful day.